Hey friends, tonight we're stepping away from the well-known myths and into the quieter stories, tales of the forgotten heroes of ancient Greece. Their names may not be famous, but their paths are just as rich, full of bravery, loss, and quiet triumph. If you enjoy these calm journeys through the ancient world, feel free to like the video and subscribe. And if a name in tonight's story stands out to you, tell us in the comments, what did you like or dislike about it? But enough of that. It's time to get comfortable. Let your thoughts slow down, listen to the lyre slowly fade into the Aegean, and let the stories do the rest. If you ever needed a hero to literally sweep you off your feet, Calais would be your guy. Why? Because he was one half of the winged duo known as the Boreads, the sons of Boreas, the North Wind. And when you're born with the ability to fly, that sort of makes you an instant legend. Calais, along with his twin brother Zetes, had wings that could rival the best of the gods. While some heroes had superhuman strength or divine weapons, Calais had wings that could soar across the heavens, allowing him to fly faster than any mortal man, glide through the air with ease and outrun even the quickest of chariots. Talk about making a grand entrance. While others were left running around like mortals do, Calais just spread his wings, gave a nod to the breeze, and wham, he was already at the front. But Calais wasn't just about looking cool while flying. He was a fierce warrior in his own right, with a fiery temper to match the intensity of the north wind that birthed him. Like his brother Zetes, Calais was a part of the legendary crew of the Argonauts, called upon to help Jason recover the Golden Fleece from the treacherous land of Colchis. And just like his brother, he never backed down from a challenge, whether it was battling gods, monsters, or simply outrunning a storm. Now, in the world of Greek mythology, being born a son of Boreas wasn't all sunshine and winged flights. Sure, it sounded cool, but it came with its own set of responsibilities, and occasionally a lot of annoying divine interference. Calais and his brother Zetes had to deal with the usual divine favoritism, but they also found themselves the subject of some serious mortal envy. Because what could be more frustrating than trying to run a marathon, only to be outdone by a guy who flies? Despite the constant attention and occasional jealousy, Calais didn't let the wings or the wind get to his head. He was a man of action, always ready for the next challenge, and always eager to lend a hand to his fellow Argonauts. Whether it was scouting out dangerous territories or helping Jason and the others overcome incredible odds, Calais was always flying high, and often a bit ahead of the rest. But there was something else about Calais that made him unique among the Argonauts. While Zetes was often the more impulsive of the two brothers, Calais had a bit more restraint. He was still quick to act, but he had a way of seeing things in a way his brother didn't, especially when it came to the more diplomatic side of their adventures. While his brother might have just charged in with blazing speed, Calais was often the one to think through their next move, just fast enough to make a difference, but not so fast that he missed the bigger picture. This balance between speed and thought made Calais a unique asset to the team. Though he shared the same divine heritage as Zetes, Calais was more than just the winged warrior. He was a strategist, someone who could rise above the chaos of battle and see what others could not. The two brothers complemented each other perfectly, and together they were a force to be reckoned with in the world of Greek heroes. So when Jason called on the greatest warriors and heroes of Greece to join him in the quest for the Golden Fleece, Calais was more than ready to take to the skies once more, this time with the fate of an entire mission on his wings. From the moment Calais and his brother Zetes joined the Argonauts, it was clear that their presence would change the course of the quest. While the Argonauts were already a group of impressive heroes, including figures like Heracles, Orpheus and Jason, the addition of two winged warriors took things to another level. With the ability to fly, Calais had a distinct advantage over any obstacles that required speed and agility, and he quickly became one of the most vital members of the team. But Calais wasn't just about soaring above the competition. His flying abilities allowed him to scout ahead, bypass obstacles, and, on occasion, engage in combat in ways that others couldn't. While Zetes would often rush in with his typical fiery enthusiasm, Calais approached each situation with a bit more patience. This balance of speed and strategy made him the perfect complement to his brother, and the two of them worked seamlessly as a team. Calais, despite his tendency to fly into action, was much more calculated than his impulsive brother. One of the Argonauts' first major challenges came when they encountered the clashing rocks, or the Symplegades, which were two massive rocks that collided together whenever a ship tried to pass between them. Zetes, ever the daring one, suggested they simply fly through the gap, confident that his speed would let him pass through before the rocks could crush the ship. Calais, however, suggested they wait for a moment when the rocks were about to separate and then move forward as quickly as possible, using the team's collective momentum to get through. Thanks to Calais' foresight and his brother's speed, the Argonauts managed to sail safely between the clashing rocks, and the team was able to avoid the disaster that would have resulted from rushing into the fray too quickly. This careful planning and cooperation, with Calais as the strategic thinker and Zetes as the quick executor, became their hallmark throughout the journey. Their synergy demonstrated that quick action needed to be paired with thoughtful execution in order to ensure success. As the crew continued on their journey, Calais played an instrumental role in many other pivotal moments. His ability to soar high above the group allowed him to spot dangers from afar, whether they were monsters, divine traps, or hidden paths. There was one memorable incident when the Argonauts encountered a group of sirens whose haunting song had claimed the lives of many sailors. While most of the heroes were already prepared to block out the sound of the sirens with earplugs or other methods, Calais took a different approach. He soared above the rocks and tuned his ears to the wind, where he could hear the siren's song without it affecting him. He circled above the group, using his speed to keep the siren's song from reaching the crew's ears, allowing them to continue onward with only a slight disturbance. It was a clever use of his abilities, and a testament to how Calais' gift wasn't just about flying fast. It was about knowing when and how to use his talents in ways that others hadn't considered. But perhaps Calais' most crucial moment in the Argonauts came when the team reached the land of Colchis, where the Golden Fleece was guarded by both monsters and divine forces. While Jason and Medea worked on a strategy to claim the fleece, Calais and Zetes became instrumental in helping the team navigate through the treacherous paths that led to the dragon guarding the fleece. Calais' ability to fly allowed him to avoid many of the traps and dangers on the ground, scouting ahead and providing valuable information to the rest of the team. When the time came to retrieve the Golden Fleece, it was Calais' wings that allowed him to get past the dragon, creating the perfect distraction while Jason moved in for the fleece. With a few well-timed aerial maneuvers, Calais was able to lead the dragon away from the tree where the Golden Fleece hung, buying the Argonauts just enough time to act. His quick thinking and swift movements helped turn the tide in their favour, and ultimately allowed them to claim the fleece. As the Argonauts' journey neared its climax, and with the Golden Fleece now in their possession, Calais began to notice a shift in the winds of their quest. While the Argonauts celebrated their success, the challenges of the journey weren't over yet. Their return to Iolcus, the home of Jason, was far from peaceful. Despite the golden prize, there were still dangers that threatened the crew, and Calais, who had always relied on his speed to get ahead of the dangers, was suddenly facing a problem he could not outfly. The gods, ever watchful and ever playful, had decided that the Argonauts had grown too comfortable in their successes. Zeus, in his usual unpredictable way, sent a final trial their way. As the Argonauts sailed home, a divine storm arose, stirred by the whims of Poseidon. The storm, fierce and relentless, tested the Argonauts' resolve and their ability to stay united as a team. Calais, ever the confident speedster, took to the skies with his wings, thinking he could simply outfly the storm. He had faced many dangers before, often swooping through them without a second thought, but this time was different. The storm that raged above was unlike any he had ever faced. It wasn't a monster that could be fought head-on, nor was it a rival that could be outrun. It was a force of nature, a divine challenge that even Calais couldn't fly past. For the first time, he found himself helpless. The wind that was his ally, the same force that had given him wings and speed, was now working against him. He struggled against the tempest, his wings straining to stay aloft, but the storm was too powerful. In a moment of frustration, Calais realized something. No matter how fast he flew, no matter how much he tried to rely on his gift of speed, there were some forces in the world that were simply beyond his control. He couldn't outrun the will of the gods, and he couldn't outfly the storm of fate. As the storm raged, Calais was forced to return to the Argonauts, where they had to work together to navigate the storm. It was only when the group joined forces, using the wisdom of Orpheus, the strategic thinking of Jason, and the courage of Heracles, that they managed to calm the seas and survive the storm. In that moment, Calais realised that while speed and strength had gotten him far, they were not enough to guarantee success. The storm had shown him that there were battles where flying ahead was no longer the solution. Sometimes it took patience, teamwork and humility to overcome the greatest challenges. His role as a hero had been based on action and quickness, but now Calais understood that heroism was about being adaptable and knowing when to act and when to rely on others. Zeitz, his brother, had already learned this lesson, and now Calais understood that his strength wasn't just in his wings, but in his ability to work with the team and learn when to step back. After the storm of Poseidon, the Argonauts slowly made their way back to Iolcus, their journey now marked by the reality of what they had learned. Calais, who had once relied on his wings and speed to avoid the consequences of his actions, found himself wrestling with his own limitations. The storm had been a wake-up call, a reminder that no matter how gifted one might be, there were forces beyond even the greatest hero's control. Calais had always been impulsive, flying ahead, acting first, and thinking later. His wings had always been his trump card, allowing him to escape danger, scout ahead, and sometimes solve problems before they even arose. But now, with the storm behind them, Calais couldn't help but wonder if his approach had been all wrong. The storm had humbled him, showing him that he couldn't always be the first to act, nor could he always avoid the consequences of his recklessness. As the Argonauts sailed closer to Iolcus, Calais spent many nights at the prow of the ship staring out at the endless sea. The wind, his old companion, howled softly around him, but now it felt like an old friend whose advice he had ignored. What good were wings if they couldn't help you navigate the storms of life, he thought. On one such night, Jason came to stand beside him. "You've been quiet," Jason remarked, noticing the shift in Calais' usual upbeat demeanour. "Is something bothering you?" Calais didn't answer at first. He stared out at the water, feeling the weight of his own thoughts. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "I used to think I could outrun everything, that if I was fast enough I could avoid the hard choices, but after the storm I see how foolish I've been." Jason nodded, understanding more than he let on. "We've all had to face our own challenges. Some of us learned the hard way that strength alone isn't enough." He paused before continuing. "What you did for the crew, the way you distracted the dragon at Colchis, that took more than speed. It took courage. The same courage it takes to admit you don't have all the answers." Calais smiled weakly, the weight on his chest slightly lifting. "I guess I always thought I was the fastest, the most daring. But speed's not enough. Not anymore. I need to be better than that." In the days that followed, Calais slowly began to find a new balance. His role in the Argonauts had always been clear. He was the flyer, the scout, the one who went ahead. But he had come to realize that, as a hero, there were other qualities he needed to embrace: patience, teamwork, and strategic thinking. Rather than rushing into every battle, Calais began to listen more, working alongside his comrades to come up with plans before acting. His newfound perspective wasn't just about slowing down. It was about seeing the bigger picture. He learned to see beyond his own wings, beyond his own abilities, and appreciate the strengths of others. He started looking for ways to contribute more to the group, not just as a fast flyer, but as a team player. It wasn't an easy shift, but with time, Calais found that his greatest strength wasn't in how fast he could fly, it was in how he could adapt to the needs of the team and use his abilities wisely. The Argonauts noticed the change in him. Zeitz, his brother, who had always been the impulsive one of the pair, began to recognize the value of patience and restraint in their strategy. The two of them worked together more harmoniously, no longer rushing into danger without thinking. Jason was relieved to see Calais take on more of a leadership role, offering suggestions and advice when needed, rather than just charging in with his usual vigour. It wasn't long before the Argonauts faced yet another challenge, a final test before their return to Iolcus. They encountered Nereus, the shape-shifting sea god, who had been sent to delay their return. Unlike the many challenges they had already overcome, this one required strategy, something that required more than just brute strength or speed. Calais, now in a place of inner strength, took charge of the situation. Instead of rushing forward as he might have in the past, he worked alongside Jason and the others, using his wings to outmaneuver Nereus and figure out the most effective way to trap him. It was a team effort, but Calais' calm, thoughtful approach made all the difference in ensuring their success. The Argonauts' return to Iolcus was filled with celebration. Their victory over the challenges of Colchis, the retrieval of the Golden Fleece, and the trials they had endured were now stories sung in every corner of Greece. But for Calais, the journey was far from over. Though the hero's welcome awaited them, he knew that the triumph over the dragon, the harpies, and even the simple Gades had led him to an even greater personal victory. As the ship neared the shores of Iolcus, Calais felt the weight of his internal transformation. It wasn't the golden fleece he had fought for, it was the growth he had experienced in himself. The storms of the journey had not only tested their physical strength, but their resolve, their decisions, and their capacity to change. Zeitz, his brother, still maintained that cocky, exuberant energy, but Calais had grown more grounded, calmer. He knew now that he wasn't just one of the winged heroes, he was part of something bigger. The impulse to act quickly, to charge in without thinking, had lost its luster. Speed was no longer his most precious asset. It was the ability to choose his moments, to act with thought, to work alongside others for a collective goal. But this newfound wisdom didn't come easily. The lingering doubts from the encounter with Poseidon's storm still haunted Calais. The storm had been his greatest test, not only as a warrior, but as a leader. It was the first time that Calais had ever felt completely helpless. Flying had been his answer to almost every challenge in life, and yet speed had not saved him from the overwhelming power of the storm. No matter how fast he flew, he had been brought down by a force greater than him. As they docked in Iolcus, he found himself quietly contemplating those moments, the waves crashing against the ship, the way he had tried to fly ahead of the storm, only to find himself battered and humbled. The memory stung. It had shown him that while wings could carry him above the world, they could not shield him from the forces of fate. That was a lesson he would not forget. And it made him realize that heroism was not about being faster, but about facing what could not be outrun, whether it was a storm, a trial of the gods, or the personal growth that every hero needed to undergo. During their final days in Iolcus, as the Argonauts celebrated their victory and began to prepare for their return to normal life, Calais' newfound wisdom began to influence others. Zeitz, who had always been the more reckless and impulsive of the two, started to notice the shift in his brother's approach. He too had always believed that speed was the answer. Quick, daring decisions were the mark of greatness. But now, as Calais showed him, there was strength in restraint, and wisdom in patience. "You know, maybe you were right about all that patient stuff," Zeitz admitted, smirking, though there was a hint of respect in his voice. Running ahead might not always be the best option. Calais laughed lightly, his voice more relaxed than it had ever been. "Trust me, brother, I know now. There's nothing faster than a lesson learned the hard way." Their conversation was light, but in it the shift in their dynamic was clear. No longer were they just winged warriors. They were now part of a group of heroes who had to balance their own strengths with the strengths of others. Calais' role had changed, not from an impulsive flyer, but to someone who could mentor, guide, and bring balance to the group. It wasn't just Zeitz who saw this change. Jason and Medea, who had long relied on the strength of the Argonauts' physical might, began to realize that Calais was not just a fast-moving asset, but an integral part of their team in more than just a physical sense. They had seen him evolve from a hero who raced into action without thinking to one who now paused, assessed, and made decisions with the entire group in mind. "You've grown, Calais," Jason said one evening, his tone more serious than it usually was. "You've learned how to see the bigger picture, and you've helped guide us all." Medea too nodded in agreement. "There's more strength in you now, not just in your wings, but in your wisdom. You've become not just a hero, but a guide to the rest of us." The consequences of Calais' growth weren't immediately obvious to the world. In fact, in the grand mythological tradition, his name wasn't as widely sung as that of Heracles, or Jason, or even Orpheus. But for those who had travelled with him, for those who had seen his journey of self-discovery, Calais' transformation was one of the most important of all. His legacy became one of adaptability, humility, and the understanding that true heroism was not about being the fastest or the strongest, but about knowing when to act, when to lead, and when to step back. As the years passed, stories of Calais were passed down, often with less fanfare than other heroes, but always with an underlying theme, that heroism was about more than just physical strength. It was about the strength of character, the the ability to grow, to learn, and to use one's gifts for the good of the team. Calais, as part of the Boreads, was gifted with wings, but it was his ability to adapt and to grow that made him one of the greatest heroes of his time. The return to Iolcus was bittersweet for the Argonauts. They had accomplished the impossible. They had retrieved the Golden Fleece and survived the most treacherous trials. Songs were sung and heroes were celebrated, but behind the revelry, the journey had left its mark on each of them. For Calais, the greatest reward was not the fleece, but the wisdom he had gained along the way. And while his name might not have been as widely sung as Heracles or Jason, his legacy lived on in a quieter, more meaningful way. Calais' story, though often overshadowed by his more famous comrades, became a symbol of what true heroism looked like in its most self-reflective and mature form. The heroes who came after him, inspired by his example, would look to Calais as someone who had learned that bravery was not always about rushing into the unknown, but about understanding the moment, knowing when to act, when to lead, and when to pause and think. Years after the Argonauts' adventure, Calais remained a pillar of wisdom in Thrace. In the quiet of his homeland, the winged hero who had once been known for his impetuousness became known for his leadership. He no longer flew just for the thrill of the wind, but with purpose. His speed had been his greatest asset and his greatest flaw, but by the end of the journey, Calais had learned that true power lay in knowing when to stop flying and take a moment to think. He began to mentor younger heroes who came to him for guidance, teaching them that heroism wasn't just about physical feats or victories, it was about personal growth and adapting to challenges. Calais' lessons were more than just practical advice about battle strategy. They were about understanding that true heroism came from growth, from learning from one's mistakes and not rushing headlong into every decision. He taught them that every hero, no matter how gifted, would encounter obstacles they couldn't fly over, storms they couldn't outrun, and trials they couldn't solve alone. The younger generation of heroes would later refer to Calais not just as a legendary warrior, but as a mentor, the hero who showed them how to balance strength with patience. His story, passed down through the generations, wasn't just about the Golden Fleece or the monsters he helped defeat. It was about the wisdom and courage required to face one's own limits and still keep moving forward. Even the gods who had watched Calais grow recognized his transformation. Zeus, who had seen so many mortals rise and fall, noticed that Calais had changed the way heroes should be remembered. While many of the gods revelled in their power and strength, Calais had shown that the true measure of a hero wasn't in the battles won or the trophies claimed. It was in the ability to change, to grow, and to learn from the mistakes made along the way. As Calais aged, his once impulsive nature softened into a reflective wisdom, and his legacy became one of the most important lessons for all future heroes. Heroism wasn't defined by speed or strength, but by the choices you make when you find yourself at a crossroads. The hero who can admit they don't have all the answers is often the one who grows the most, and that, Calais taught, was the mark of true greatness. In Part 6, Extended, we reflect on Calais' lasting legacy. His story is a testament to the power of personal growth and the importance of wisdom over raw strength. After the Golden Fleece quest, Calais becomes a mentor to future heroes, teaching them that heroism is not about how fast you can act, but about how well you can adapt, learn, and grow. He leaves behind a legacy not of fame and grand victories, but of a hero who came to understand that true strength lies in character and the willingness to learn from the journey. His impact extends beyond his lifetime, influencing the next generation of heroes who will come to understand that the path to greatness is not a straight line, but one that requires patience, thoughtfulness, and the ability to change. As Calais' story passed into legend, his tale was often told in hushed tones, not for the glory of his speed or his victories, but for the wisdom he imparted to future generations of heroes. The Argonauts had brought back the Golden Fleece, but Calais returned with something far more lasting, a sense of understanding, growth, and the realization that true heroism lay not in the glory of battle, but in the choices one made when faced with obstacles, both external and internal. Calais' story became a key example of how self-reflection and personal growth were just as important as fighting monsters or claiming divine prizes. In many ways, his evolution from a reckless, impulsive hero to a strategic, thoughtful leader became an archetype that many of Greece's greatest heroes would try to follow. Heracles, Theseus, and even Odysseus, while celebrated for their strength and cunning, would all face moments where they too would be tested not by their might, but by their ability to learn from their trials. Calais' legacy in particular had a profound impact on the younger generation of heroes who would follow in the Argonauts' footsteps. The Boreads were among the few heroes whose names weren't always shouted from the rooftops, but were quietly passed down as models of virtue in a world often dominated by immediate victories and glory-filled feats. In his home of Thrace, Calais became a respected figure, not just for his wings or his strength, but for his calm nature and the way he helped others find balance in their own journeys. Young warriors and sailors would often come to him for advice, seeking not just guidance on battle tactics, but on life choices, on how to navigate the storms, both literal and metaphorical, that awaited them. One of the most famous stories that continued to be told about Calais after his time was the lesson he taught during the return of the Argonauts. When the group faced their final divine trial, Calais was the one who understood that it was not their strength but their ability to work together that would see them through. He realised that heroism wasn't a solitary pursuit, but one that required a deep connection to the people around you. In times of great trial, it wasn't enough to rely solely on one's strength or speed. Patience, collaboration, and trust in others became the true markers of greatness. Even the gods, who had often toyed with the mortals during their quests, couldn't help but notice Calais' growth. While many heroes were immortalised for defeating monsters, Calais was remembered for his wisdom, for knowing that even the strongest were sometimes shackled by their own hubris. His legacy was a reminder that the true challenge for a hero was not in conquering external enemies, but in facing themselves, in finding the strength to change and evolve. As the years went by, the Boreads, Zetes and Calais became figures of mythical reverence. Their feats were immortalised not just for their physical strength, but for the transformative lessons they imparted. They were often cited as examples of how personal growth was just as important as physical prowess in the making of a true hero. Calais, with his humility and self-awareness, became a symbol of the idea that heroes weren't born. They were made through hard work, reflection, and the constant pursuit of becoming better. The wings of Calais, once a symbol of unmatched speed, now represented something more significant. The freedom that came with knowing when to soar and when to rest, when to act and when to reflect. His wings were no longer just a tool for swift travel. They had become a symbol of personal flight, of rising above challenges, and of seeing the world with new eyes, the eyes of someone who had learned the importance of patience and understanding. In the grand tapestry of Greek heroes, Ancaeus often goes underappreciated. While names like Jason, Heracles and Orpheus dominate the tales of the Argonauts, Ancaeus played a vital role that is often overlooked. He was the helmsman of the Argo, the one responsible for steering the ship through the most dangerous waters the Argonauts would encounter. If a hero's strength lies in the ability to guide and lead, then Ancaeus was no less a hero than the mighty Heracles or the cunning Jason. Ancaeus was a son of Poseidon, the god of the sea, and like many of his divine relatives, he was bestowed with an intimate understanding of the sea. But unlike his more famous relatives, who would go on to great fame for their labours or battles, Ancaeus found his place among the Argonauts as a guide and protector of the crew's most precious asset, the Argo. His knowledge of the sea and the way the waves moved were unparalleled, and his calm demeanour in the face of danger made him the perfect choice to helm the ship. But Ancaeus' background wasn't just about his sea knowledge. Born to Poseidon and a mortal woman, he grew up with an inherent understanding of nature's forces, especially the turbulent and unpredictable sea. He didn't possess the strength of a warrior like Heracles or the charm of Jason, but his deep connection to the sea gave him the unique ability to understand the rhythm of the waters and the patterns of the winds. Growing up, Ancaeus was often called upon to calm the seas and to help those lost on the water find their way. Whether it was helping to steer ships through dangerous storms or guiding sailors on long voyages, Ancaeus became known as the master of the waves, an expert navigator, capable of guiding even the most tempestuous ships through the roughest waters. When Jason gathered the greatest heroes of Greece for his quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece, Ancaeus was an obvious choice to serve as the helmsman of the Argo. While Jason sought warriors, Ancaeus' skills were more intellectual, his true strength lying in his ability to read the sea and keep the ship on course, no matter the dangers that lay ahead. It wasn't long after setting sail that Ancaeus' abilities proved indispensable. The Argonauts were heading into unknown waters, and the journey would bring them face to face with mythical creatures, violent storms, and treacherous enemies. For all the strength and bravery of the Argonauts, it was Ancaeus who ensured that the ship stayed afloat, who was there to steady the helm when the sea raged and the skies darkened. While Ancaeus didn't possess the brawn of Heracles or the leadership of Jason, his unshakable calm in the face of danger was what kept the crew moving forward. Without Ancaeus, the Argonauts would have been adrift, literally and figuratively. His steady hand at the helm was the true mark of his heroism. In a world full of brawn, Ancaeus showed that sometimes the greatest strength lay in quiet competence and determination. The Argonauts were a group of heroes who each brought something remarkable to the table. Heracles brought his unmatched strength, Orpheus brought his music that could charm the wildest beasts, and Jason brought his leadership skills. But there was one thing that set them apart from every other group of adventurers in Greek mythology. They had Ancaeus at the helm of their ship, the Argo. While many of the Argonauts were accustomed to fighting monsters or seeking treasure, Ancaeus' talents lay in an area few others in the crew could claim. His ability to navigate the sea, reading the weather, tides and winds with unparalleled skill. This was no small feat considering the many dangers the Argonauts would face on their journey. When they set sail from Iolcus, their journey was full of unknowns. Jason had gathered the greatest heroes of Greece, but without someone capable of safely steering the ship through dangerous waters, their quest could easily have ended before it had begun. Ancaeus, born of Poseidon and a mortal woman, understood the sea in a way few others could. His affinity for the ocean wasn't just about navigating, it was about understanding its moods, knowing when the waters were calm and when they were ready to unleash their fury. One of the earliest challenges the Argonauts faced came when they sailed into the Bosphorus, the narrow and perilous strait that led them toward the Black Sea. The clashing rocks, massive, ever-moving stones that slammed together, destroying anything in their path, lay ahead. The crew had heard of these rocks, and Jason's strategy was to launch the Argo through the gap before the rocks could collide. But even the best-laid plans had to be executed flawlessly, and this was where Ancaeus stepped in. He had already been quietly observing the movements of the rocks from the moment they entered the strait. As the Argonauts prepared to make their move, it was Ancaeus who noticed the timing, the exact moment when the rocks would separate just enough to let them pass. With a calm hand on the wheel, Ancaeus guided the Argo through the narrowest of gaps. As the Argonauts passed through the rocks, the massive stones smashed behind them with a terrifying crash. But thanks to Ancaeus' unshakable calm and expertise, they were already through and well on their way, leaving the dangerous rocks behind them. The crew cheered in relief, but Ancaeus simply nodded, his focus already shifting to the next obstacle. For him, this wasn't just about navigating the sea, it was about reading it, understanding it, and guiding the crew through its ever-changing tides. But Ancaeus' most crucial moment came when the Argonauts encountered the Sirens, the creatures whose songs were so enchanting that they lured sailors to their deaths. The Argonauts were warned that they would soon encounter the Sirens' deadly melody, and Jason asked his crew to prepare accordingly. Some of the Argonauts, such as Orpheus, had their own methods of dealing with the Sirens, but Ancaeus saw things a little differently. With his deep connection to the sea and the rhythms of the world, Ancaeus understood that fighting the Sirens with brute strength or magic would not work. The Sirens weren't beasts to be slain. They were forces of nature. They needed to be outsmarted. Ancaeus, instead of rushing to confront the Sirens head-on, suggested that the Argonauts sail through the dangerous waters as quickly as possible, using their skills and strategy to navigate around the Sirens rather than engaging them directly. Orpheus, hearing the proposal, agreed to play his music in return, keeping the Argonauts distracted while Ancaeus steered the ship through the waves, guiding them past the Sirens without falling prey to their deadly song. Though Orpheus's music provided the shield they needed, it was Ancaeus who ensured that the Argo remained on course, sailing as swiftly as possible through this dangerous strait. With his steady hand on the wheel, the Argonauts passed the Sirens unharmed, not through battle but through wisdom and careful navigation. Through these challenges, Ancaeus proved that his abilities went far beyond just knowing the waters. His cool-headed nature, his strategic thinking, and his deep understanding of the world around him made him indispensable to the Argonauts. Without him, the Argo would not have made it through the clashing rocks. Without his keen mind, they might have fallen victim to the sirens, as so many sailors had before them. Though Ancaeus was not the loudest or most charismatic of the Argonauts, his role was one of quiet but vital importance. He didn't need the accolades or the glory of victory. His heroism was seen in his steady presence, in his ability to lead the ship through both literal and figurative storms, and in the calm wisdom that he provided to the crew at the helm. As the Argonauts sailed on their legendary quest for the Golden Fleece, they encountered one peril after another. Yet amid these physical and supernatural threats, Ancaeus began to face his own personal turning point, a moment of reflection that would reshape his understanding of his role within the group and the nature of heroism. While Ancaeus had always prided himself on his unparalleled skills as a helmsman and his calm under pressure, he began to realize that the journey would require more than just the ability to navigate through storms and calm the seas. The Argonauts were a band of heroes, each bringing their own powers and skills to the table, and it was becoming increasingly clear that Ancaeus would have to evolve in order to be more than just a member of the crew who stood at the helm. The turning point came when the Argonauts encountered the mighty Hydra, a multi-headed serpent that terrorized the land of Lerna. As Jason and the other Argonauts geared up for battle, Ancaeus was faced with a dilemma. The Hydra's heads were said to regenerate every time they were cut off, making the monster virtually invincible. Even the bravery and strength of heroes like Heracles and Theseus could do little to stop the creature without the right strategy. For Ancaeus, it was the first time in the quest that his navigation skills weren't the primary solution to the problem at hand. His role had always been clear: steer the ship, guide the crew through the dangers of the sea and keep them on course. But how could he help fight a creature that was not bound by geography or tides? In the face of this challenge, Ancaeus began to question his place among the group. Could he be more than just the navigator? Could he fight as his comrades did, and take part in the physical challenges they faced? His internal conflict came to a head when he realized that his skills, though critical to the Argonauts' survival up until that point, were not enough to guarantee victory against the Hydra. It was then that Ancaeus learned a hard truth. Heroes don't operate in a vacuum. True heroism was not about one person or even one skill. It was about working together, each person bringing something to the table and contributing to the success of the whole. Ancaeus stood alongside his comrades, offering what advice he could on how best to approach the fight. But instead of rushing into the fray, he took on a new role, one of a strategist, a collaborator. He realized that while he couldn't defeat the Hydra himself, he could help by offering insights into how the team could use their strengths to bring down the creature. He coordinated efforts between the fighters, keeping the team focused and calm during the battle, just as he had done when he steered the Argo through dangerous waters. The Hydra was eventually defeated not by one person or one weapon, but through the teamwork of the Argonauts. Heracles struck the final blow, but it was Ancaeus' strategic input, his guidance, and his ability to remain calm under pressure that helped the group succeed. This battle was the moment that marked Ancaeus' true transformation from a quiet, unseen hero into a central figure who had learned the importance of teamwork and collaboration. In the aftermath of the Hydra's defeat, Ancaeus came to a profound realization. Heroism was not about individual glory or the ability to fight alone. It was about understanding your place in the group, learning to adapt, and contributing in the ways that mattered most. He understood now that his gifts, while crucial, were only part of what made him a hero. It was his ability to listen, adapt, and work with others that made him truly indispensable. After the defeat of the Hydra, the Argonauts continued their journey, but the battle left an indelible mark on Ancaeus. It was the first time that he had truly confronted the limits of his abilities. He had always been the one who kept the ship on course, who had the wisdom to read the winds and tides and guide the Argo through dangerous seas. But facing the Hydra, a monster whose power was beyond simple navigation or physical might, had challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The victory over the Hydra, won through teamwork and strategy, had proved invaluable. Ancaeus had played a crucial role, not by striking a blow with a weapon, but by guiding the team, providing support, and keeping everyone focused on the bigger picture. He had proven that leadership wasn't just about strength, but about recognizing when to step back and allow others to shine. while offering advice and direction when needed. Despite this realization, Ancaeus found himself struggling emotionally in the aftermath. The victory was sweet, but it left him with a sense of insecurity. His internal struggle revolved around the fact that, for the first time in his life, he had failed to act decisively in battle. He had always been the one who took control of the situation, but now he had to come to terms with the fact that his greatest strength, his ability to read the sea and navigate the ship, wasn't always enough in the face of monstrous enemies. As the journey continued, Ancaeus found himself becoming more reflective. He spent hours alone on the deck of the Argo, watching the water, lost in thought. The winds that had once been his trusted allies now felt distant. He questioned whether he was truly worthy of being a hero, given that he hadn't fought in the way the others had. While the Argonauts celebrated their victories, Ancaeus couldn't shake the feeling that he had been just an observer, someone who had been too afraid to step out of his comfort zone and act when it truly mattered. The defining moment of his internal struggle came during another trial. This time, a storm sent by Zeus himself. As the Argo sailed into a violent squall, the ship began to rock violently, and the crew had to act quickly to avoid being thrown off course. Jason called for Ancaeus to steer the ship through the storm, but Ancaeus hesitated. The storm was unlike anything he had ever seen. The winds howled and the waves rose higher than the ship's mast. Ancaeus, who had always relied on his ability to calm the sea and guide the ship through storms, suddenly felt overwhelmed. For the first time in his life, he doubted his ability to steer them through this challenge. "I can't do it," he muttered to himself, staring into the churning sea. "What if I fail them? What if I can't protect the ship this time?" But just as he began to succumb to his fear, Jason appeared by his side, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Ancaeus, we've trusted you this far," Jason said calmly. "We don't need perfection. We need you to trust yourself and keep us on course. You've always been the one who guides us." The words were simple, but they cut through Ancaeus' self-doubt like a knife through fog. Ancaeus looked at the crew, the very people he had travelled alongside through thick and thin, and realised that they believed in him. He wasn't just the man at the helm, he was an integral part of their journey. Calais, Heracles, Orpheus and the others had all played their roles, but he had always been the one who kept them moving forward through the storm. With newfound resolve, Ancaeus stepped up to the helm, his hand steady as he grasped the wheel. He used his knowledge of the seas, his connection to the winds, and the lessons he had learned in his journey to guide the Argo through the storm. For hours he worked tirelessly, steering the ship with precision, even as the sky above darkened and the waves grew fiercer. In the end, it wasn't just his skill that saved them, it was the realization that heroism wasn't about acting alone. Ancaeus had always believed that he was solely responsible for the ship's safety, but now he saw that true leadership was about accepting help, working with others, and trusting in the team that had always believed in him. Ancaeus had found his place, not just at the helm, but as part of a larger community of heroes. By the time the Argonauts neared the end of their journey, the changes in Ancaeus were clear to everyone. The Argo had made it through every perilous trial, and Ancaeus, once merely the helmsman who steered the ship, had become an integral part of the team, not just in his ability to guide the vessel, but in his newfound understanding of leadership and teamwork. After the storm, where he had faced his own doubts, Ancaeus became more than just a navigator. He was trusted and respected by the crew for his calm demeanour, his intelligence, and the humility with which he had approached his transformation. The Argonauts had faced literal monsters, storms and divine tests, but Ancaeus had come to understand that the greatest challenge of all was the one that had taken place within himself. During the final stage of their journey, as they sailed toward Iolcus, the Argonauts had to confront the repercussions of their quest. Their success with the Golden Fleece had been hard-earned, and the gods had made it clear that not every victory came without consequence. Eats, still angered by their theft of the fleece, sent one last trial in an attempt to delay the Argonauts' return. The challenge was simple yet deadly. A flood of monstrous creatures, including sea serpents and other mythical beasts, had been unleashed upon the crew. Ancaeus, who had steered the Argo through countless dangers, now had to face the fact that he would need to navigate them through treacherous waters again. But this time, it wasn't just the sea that posed the danger. The creatures were attacking from all sides, and the Argonauts' usual tactics weren't working. It was clear that brute force wasn't enough, Ancaeus had to think quickly, and for the first time in a long time, he was challenged not just as a helmsman, but as a strategist and leader. The monsters were too many and too fast to fight head-on, and the Argo was now too large and cumbersome to manoeuvre through the aggressive sea creatures without being attacked. This time, the Argonauts couldn't rely on Herculean strength or flying speed. They would need to outthink the attack. And it was in this moment of crisis that Ancaeus remembered the core lesson he had learned during his time with the Hydra and the earlier storm. True strength lay in thinking ahead, in working together. He quickly devised a plan to steer the Argo through the flooded waters while using the Argonauts' unique abilities to their advantage. He had Orpheus play a song to calm some of the creatures, while Jason, Heracles and the rest of the warriors dealt with those that couldn't be pacified. Ancaeus' role was crucial. He guided the ship with incredible precision, dodging the attacking creatures and ensuring that the ship stayed on course. The Argonauts had been facing trials where strength alone couldn't guarantee success. Ancaeus had learned that a calm mind and a steady hand were just as important as the courage to fight. When the sea serpents were finally subdued and the monsters began to retreat, Ancaeus stood at the helm of the Argo, exhausted but fulfilled. For the first time, he realized that his true role was not just about steering the ship, it was about understanding when to guide, when to act, and when to trust the abilities of those around him. As the Argonauts reached Iolcus, the city they had set out from so long ago, Ancaeus knew that his journey had been one of both external adventure and internal transformation. He was no longer the quiet helmsman who had quietly steered the ship through the unknown. Ancaeus had become a true leader, a mentor, and a hero in his own right. His growth had allowed him to recognize the value of collaboration, to understand that heroism came not from individual strength, but from the ability to work together, to adapt, and to learn from the trials that life presented. As the Argonauts returned to Iolcus after their triumphant quest for the Golden Fleece, they were greeted as legends. Their names would be immortalized in myth, sung about in songs that would echo through the halls of time. Jason, Heracles, Orpheus, and the others would be remembered for their might and courage. Yet Ancaeus, the helmsman of the Argo, the one who guided them through countless dangers, would not be forgotten. His contribution, while not as immediately glamorous or visible as the feats of strength and heroism displayed by his comrades, had been crucial to the success of the Argonauts. Though Ancaeus was never the centre of attention, his quiet leadership became the bedrock upon which the Argonauts relied. His ability to keep the ship steady, no matter the storm or the monster they faced, gave the crew a sense of security. He wasn't the one to slay the Hydra or best the Cyclops in battle, but it was Ancaeus' steady hand at the helm that allowed them to reach their final destination. And it was his growth, his transformation from helmsman to strategist, from quiet observer to trusted leader, that would come to symbolize a deeper aspect of heroism. When Ancaeus returned to Thrace, he didn't seek the limelight. He didn't want statues erected in his honour, or songs sung about his victories. What mattered most to him was that he had played an integral part in a larger journey. His growth had been internal, and it was this quiet transformation that would leave a lasting legacy. In Thrace, Ancaeus was respected, not just for his divine heritage, but for the wisdom he had gained through his journey. As word of the Argonauts' triumph spread across Greece, younger heroes began to seek him out for advice. They came to him not only for navigation skills, but to learn the lessons he had picked up from the quest, the importance of patience, strategy, and collaboration. He became a mentor to the next generation, teaching young heroes that strength alone wasn't enough to guarantee success. Ancaeus showed them that wisdom and the ability to adapt were just as important as brute force. He often told them stories of his time with the Argonauts, focusing not on the battles they fought, but on the times when quick action had to be tempered with thoughtful planning. Calais and Zetes, the winged sons of Boreas, who had once relied so heavily on speed, came to Ancaeus to learn about the subtle art of leadership, the ability to think ahead, to guide others, and to remain calm in moments of crisis. In turn, Ancaeus learned from the brothers about the value of courage and impulsiveness, that sometimes quick action was necessary when the stakes were high. But what truly defined Ancaeus' legacy was his humility. Though he had been a key figure in the Argonauts' success, Ancaeus never sought fame. His name was passed down through stories, but never with the same loud acclaim as the others. He was the quiet hero, the one who led without demanding recognition. His greatest reward was in knowing that the Argonauts' journey was successful, that they had overcome the odds, and that he had played a part in that victory. His role was a reminder to future generations that every hero has a place in the greater story, and that no contribution, no matter how quiet, was ever too small. The Argonauts' triumph was a collective victory, built on the strengths of each member, each hero bringing something unique to the table. And Caius's legacy would become a touchstone for the heroes who came after him, a symbol of the idea that true heroism came not from seeking fame, but from doing the right thing, from fulfilling your role in a way that served the greater good. As the years passed and Caius's name became synonymous with wisdom and humility, he was remembered as one of the most thoughtful and strategic heroes of the Argonauts, a man who had guided his ship through the roughest seas and the darkest trials, not with brute strength, but with a steady hand and a calm mind. His legacy endured, not in the songs of the grandest battles, but in the quiet understanding that sometimes the most important victories were the ones won within, through personal growth, leadership, and a willingness to adapt. In the ancient Greek world, fate was not just some abstract idea. It was a literal divine mandate that could turn a perfectly ordinary day into a catastrophic disaster. For example, one moment you could be sipping a drink at a banquet, and the next you're dragged into a war that will last for years. Or like Protesilaus, you could be the first to set foot on the shores of Troy, and boom, you're the first to die. Talk about an underwhelming start to a legendary career. In the grand scheme of things, Protesilaus' destiny was sealed before he even knew it. Born in Phyllis, a rather peaceful, tranquil city, he was the son of Iphiclus and Anticlea, two people who probably didn't expect their son to become famous for any reason other than being a royal pain in the neck, as many young princes are. But fate, being the trickster it was, had other plans. Protesilaus had all the makings of a great hero. He was tall, strong, and most importantly, he had a burning sense of duty. Raised with the knowledge that honour was the highest pursuit in life, he dreamed of leading armies, winning battles, and of course, receiving a proper epic poem in his honour. Everyone loves a good ballad. But little did he know, his rise to glory would be cut tragically short by a prophecy that had been hanging over his head long before he stepped into his first pair of armour. You see, the gods, ever fond of meddling in mortal affairs, had decided that the first Greek soldier to step foot on the sands of Troy would die. It was a prophecy, a cosmic thank you from the gods to the Greeks for starting a war over a single woman. But it was a prophecy that Protesilaus, brave and eager as ever, could not escape. He didn't know this at the time, of course. If he had, maybe he would have kept his sandals firmly planted on the ship and avoided all that first-to-land nonsense. But no, duty called, and the warrior prince was ready to answer. And so, like so many heroes before him, he gathered his courage, donned his armour, and with a resolve that only someone completely unaware of their fate can have, Protesilaus marched forward to claim his destiny. If there's one thing that the Greek army needed in the early days of the Trojan War, it was a little bit of enthusiasm. Sure, they had Achilles, who was always ready for a fight, and Odysseus, who could talk circles around anyone, even the gods probably. But Protesilaus brought something different to the table: boundless enthusiasm. If the Greeks were all standing around staring at the walls of Troy, debating their next move, Protesilaus was the one jumping up and down, saying, "What are we waiting for? Let's go." And go he did. While others stood around pondering strategies, Protesilaus decided that strategy was overrated. The moment the ships hit the Trojan shore, he was already there, leading the charge. No one told him that he would be the first to step onto Trojan soil. In fact, if he'd known about the prophecy, he might have thought, first to land? Well, there's a nice sense of honour to that, I suppose. But there was no time for hesitation. He was on a mission, and nothing, not even a pesky little thing like destiny, was going to slow him down. Protesilaus' first steps onto the beach were less about tactics and more about proving a point. The Trojans had held the gates of Troy for years, and the Greeks had been more than happy to sit and wait, thinking that Troy's walls were invincible. But Protesilaus was having none of that. It was as if he thought, well, someone's got to be the first, might as well be me. And there, amidst the sound of waves crashing, spears clashing, and the distant shouts of his fellow soldiers, Protesilaus was officially the first Greek warrior to make history. just a small feat, right? As soon as his boots hit the ground, he drew his sword with a flourish and shouted a battle cry that was, quite frankly, a little over the top for such an early stage in the conflict. He charged straight into the heart of the battle, undeterred by the fact that he was probably about to face some of the fiercest warriors known to man. And yet, his courage was contagious. "For Protesilaus," echoed across the battlefield as the Greek army followed his lead, charging into Troy's defences like they'd just received a pep talk from a motivational speaker. The Trojan defenders were initially caught off guard, not just by the ferocity of the attack, but by how completely reckless and enthusiastic Protesilaus seemed. Hector, watching from the walls, likely shook his head and muttered something like, "Is this guy seriously leading the charge?" He didn't even think this through. But that was the thing about Protesilaus. He wasn't the kind of guy who would wait for the perfect strategy. He saw an opportunity and he took it. The Trojans had never expected such a bold move. In their minds, the Greeks were all about slow, tactical manoeuvres. Protesilaus proved them wrong by charging headfirst into chaos, and chaos, he found, was certainly his element. Sword in hand, Protesilaus fought with the kind of wild abandon that made the Trojans rethink their entire strategy. It wasn't just his sword skills that were impressive. It was his refusal to show fear, his willingness to take the battle to the heart of Troy. He fought with such determination that even the gods would have to stop and take notice. Zeus, with all his godly wisdom, probably muttered something like, "This guy's too eager for his own good." While other warriors might have been calculating, waiting for the perfect moment, Protesilaus was charging forward, cutting down Trojan soldiers with a mix of ferocity and humour, shouting things like, "If you're going to die today, you might as well enjoy the view of my sword." His humour was infectious, lightening the mood of the otherwise grim conflict. Achilles might have been the intimidating one, and Odysseus the planner, but Protesilaus was the guy you wanted in the thick of it, making the impossible feel like a walk in the park. It wasn't just his fighting spirit that earned him fame, it was the way he led by example. His men were inspired by him. They weren't following orders, they were following a man who had no plan but to win, and that was good enough for them. "Follow him and survive," they whispered to each other, even as they charged forward. His bravery in battle became a rallying cry for the Greeks. His sword cleaved through the air, a symbol of the Greek will to win, no matter the odds. But while Protesilaus was tearing through the Trojan lines, the gods were watching with their usual mix of amusement and indifference. They knew better than anyone that the first to land would not live to see the victory. While Zeus and Apollo might have chuckled at Protesilaus' boundless enthusiasm, they also knew his fate was sealed. "Ah, Protesilaus," they might have said, "you're too eager. Fate's already claimed you, and there's nothing even your sword can do about it." His story, it seemed, was already written, and while Protesilaus might have been charging forward with all the zest of a hero who didn't yet know his end, his rise to prominence was just the beginning of the story that would become a legend not just of bravery and recklessness, but of fate, heroism, and the ultimate cost of war. As the Greeks continued their siege of Troy, each day seemed to blur into the next, the weight of war sinking deeper into the bones of every warrior. The Trojans, though fiercely resilient, were beginning to falter under the pressure. Their walls, seemingly impenetrable, began to show signs of wear. Yet, despite these gains, the war seemed endless, with no clear path to victory. For Protesilaus, however, the question of victory was no longer his primary concern. The time for strategy and leadership had passed. The moment he had long feared, the moment his prophecy foretold, was fast approaching. He had known, ever since he'd first set foot on the shores of Troy, that his fate had been sealed. No amount of courage or prowess on the battlefield could change the prophecy. He would die here, in Troy, the first Greek to fall. The thought haunted him, but it also galvanized him. Protesilaus believed that if he were to fall in battle, it would be with honor, leading his men, fighting to the bitter end. He had faced death countless times on the battlefield, yet this time there was no escaping it. Fate, that omnipotent force that had guided so many Greek heroes, now hovered over him, a dark cloud waiting to unleash its inevitable storm. The turning point came during a particularly fierce confrontation. The Greeks had launched a full-scale assault on the Trojan gates, desperate to break through after years of siege. As the battle raged on, Protesilaus found himself in the thick of it, fighting at the front lines with a ferocity that even his enemies admired. But the gods, whose interventions had shaped so much of the war, had other plans for him. It was in the heat of the fight, as Protesilaus cleaved through Trojan warriors, that he encountered Hector, the Trojan prince and greatest of the city's defenders. The two men, each a leader in his own right, locked eyes across the battlefield. Hector, a warrior renowned for his skill and bravery, was the embodiment of Trojan pride, and Protesilaus, for all his courage, knew that his fate was now intertwined with the man he had so often heard of in war stories and songs. Their encounter, inevitable as it was a clash of titans, two warriors with everything to lose. The battle slowed as the two men circled one another, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. The noise of the conflict seemed to fade around them, the world shrinking to just the two of them, facing each other in a moment that could not be avoided. Hector, ever the noble warrior, spoke first. "You know why I must fight you," he said, his voice carrying through the clamour. "It is the will of the gods, and fate has made us enemies." Protesilaus's heart thundered in his chest, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. "It is not the gods that command me, Hector," Protesilaus replied, his voice steady though filled with a trace of sorrow. "It is my own honour, and it is my fate that has brought us here." The words hung in the air like the calm before a storm, and then the storm broke. They clashed, their swords ringing against each other with the sound of thunder, each blow sending shock waves through the ground. They fought with the intensity of men who knew that only one could walk away, that only one would survive the struggle. For a moment it seemed that Protesilaus might overcome Hector. His strikes were swift, his movements calculated, as though he were playing out his own death in slow motion. But fate, as always, would not be denied. Hector, with a warrior's instinct, seized his moment. In a single, fatal move, he drove his spear through Protesilaus' side, the point biting deep into his flesh. The Greek hero staggered, his breath ragged, as he fell to the ground. It was a death he had known would come but could never truly prepare for. As the life drained from Protesilaus, he realized the truth of the prophecy. He would die here, the first Greek warrior to fall. But in that moment, as the world around him faded, he was not filled with regret. He had led his men, fought with honour, and had fulfilled his destiny. And though his death would not come with the grand fanfare of other heroes, it would come with something far more significant, the knowledge that he had made the ultimate sacrifice in the name of duty. The battle raged on around him, but for Protesilaus it was over. His final breath was a quiet one, carried away by the winds of fate that had long ago determined his end. The death of Protesilaus struck the Greeks like a thunderbolt. His sacrifice, though foretold by the gods, left a profound void among the warriors who had come to rely on him. He had been the first to land on the shores of Troy, the first to charge into battle, and the first to fall. His death was not only the loss of a respected commander, it was the loss of a symbol. He had embodied the courage, the honour, and the sacrifice that defined Greek warriors, and now, with him gone, the very soul of the Greek army seemed to dim. In the wake of his death, the Greek camp was filled with a mournful silence. His comrades, men who had fought alongside him, who had admired his bravery, now struggled to find the words to express their grief. Achilles, ever the strong and stoic warrior, was one of the few who did not hide his sorrow. Though he was the mightiest of the Greeks, even he could not ignore the weight of Protesilaus' loss. "A man like him should not have fallen so soon," Achilles said, his voice heavy with regret. "He was the first among us, the first to charge, and the first to pay the price." For Achilles, the death of Protesilaus was more than just the loss of a comrade. It was a stark reminder that even the bravest men were not immune to fate. Protesilaus, like Achilles himself, had always lived by the sword, and now both of them stood on the precipice of a future that seemed uncertain, a future in which the gods could decide their fate at any moment. The grief in the camp was palpable, but it was also mixed with a deep sense of admiration for the fallen hero. Protesilaus had been the first to step onto the shores of Troy, and now he would be remembered as the first to fall. But in the eyes of the Greeks, his death would not be seen as a failure. It was a reminder of the ultimate sacrifice that war demanded. Still, for the leaders of the Greek forces, Protesilaus' death posed a difficult question. With such a great warrior lost, who would rise to take his place? There was no replacing a man who had led by example, a man who had inspired the Greeks to push forward against seemingly insurmountable odds. The loss of Protesilaus sent ripples through the leadership of the Greek army, causing a momentary pause in their advance toward Troy. In the quiet days that followed, Odysseus, always the strategist, gathered the leaders of the Greek forces to discuss their next steps. The mood was somber, but even in the face of such loss there was a need for action. "We mourn him," Odysseus said, "but we cannot afford to stop now. We must continue the fight. Protesilaus gave his life for this cause. Let that be our guide." Yet even as Odysseus spoke with determination, the truth was undeniable. The death of Protesilaus had altered the course of the war, at least in the hearts of the soldiers. The bond between the Greeks and the land they fought to conquer now felt more fragile. Their strength, once bolstered by the presence of so many mighty heroes, now felt more tenuous. On the Trojan side, the news of Protesilaus' death spread quickly, and it was met with mixed emotions. For Hector, it was the bitter taste of victory. Though he had struck the fatal blow, he could not help but feel a sense of sorrow for the warrior he had slain. In a way, Hector understood Protesilaus' sacrifice. He too was driven by duty, by the belief that his actions would bring glory to his people. But that was the curse of the battlefield. Even the noblest warriors were fated to fall. The gods, as they always did, watched the tragedy unfold from their divine realm. Some whispered that the death of Protesilaus was part of a larger plan, a necessary piece in the grand puzzle of the Trojan War. Others believed it was simply the cost of human ambition, a reminder of the frailty of even the greatest heroes. For Idomeneus, the king of Crete, who had fought alongside Protesilaus, the loss was particularly difficult. He had always seen Protesilaus as a younger version of himself, a man driven by honour, a man willing to sacrifice everything for the good of his people. As he stood over the body of his fallen comrade, Idomeneus felt a deep, gnawing regret. "We cannot undo fate," he muttered, his voice heavy with sorrow, "but we can honour him." The funeral rites were simple, but the ceremony was filled with emotion. The Greeks, though warriors, took a moment to pay their respects to the first among them to fall. Protesilaus' name would be remembered in their songs, and his legacy would live on in their hearts. As for Protesilaus himself, his story was far from over. Though he had fallen in battle, his sacrifice would echo throughout the war, reminding the Greeks of the ultimate cost of their struggle. The gods may have taken him, but they could not erase the mark he had left on the hearts of those who had fought alongside him. The death of Protesilaus was but a single, fleeting moment in the grand tapestry of the Trojan War, but for the Greeks, it marked a turning point. The warriors who had fought alongside him, now without their guiding light, felt the weight of the war press down on them even more heavily. The loss of such a noble figure had shaken them to their core, but as the Greeks often did, they pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and the need to honour their fallen comrade. The Greek army, though devastated, rallied. Achilles, still filled with the rage that had fueled his earlier battles, took to the field with even greater fury. The Trojans, too, had felt the sting of Protesilaus' death, knowing that one of their fiercest enemies had been slain by their own hands. But the tide of the war was far from certain. In the midst of the ongoing struggle, the Greek gods, who had long watched over the war, began to intervene more directly. Zeus, who had long been aloof in his dealings with mortals, now began to take a more active role, guiding both the Greeks and Trojans in a seemingly never-ending battle of fate and will. And yet, as always in Greek mythology, the gods were as capricious as they were powerful. Despite the gods' interference, the war dragged on. The Greeks pushed forward with renewed intensity, spurred on by the memory of Protesilaus and the tragic cost of his death. His name became a rallying cry among the soldiers, for Protesilaus was heard in the ranks as the Greeks stormed the Trojan defences, each warrior fighting with the same intensity that had marked Protesilaus' short but glorious life. But it was not just the Greek warriors who felt the loss. Hector, the greatest of the Trojan warriors, was no longer fighting with the same vigour. His victory over Protesilaus, while significant, had cost him something too. He had killed a hero, a warrior of great honour. The gods, as always, had their own plans, and in the hearts of both armies, the memory of Protesilaus lingered like a heavy fog, reminding them of the high price of victory. In one of the final clashes of the war, Achilles and Hector would meet on the battlefield, two men whose destinies were now irrevocably tied to the fate of Troy. The battle between them, though legendary, would forever carry the weight of the fallen heroes that had come before them. It was the culmination of years of bloodshed, a final showdown between the greatest champions of each side. But even as they fought, the memory of Protesilaus hung in the air. The warriors in their final moments understood that no matter the outcome, they were merely pawns in a game far bigger than themselves. The Trojan War would come to an end, as all wars do, with great loss and tragedy. The Greeks would eventually sack Troy, burning it to the ground. But the cost of that victory was staggering. The gods had exacted their price, and though the Greeks would return home, they would do so haunted by the ghosts of their comrades, the memories of the men they had lost along the way. For Protesilaus, the price of his sacrifice was his life, but his legacy would live on far beyond the walls of Troy. His name would be sung in the halls of Greek warriors, not just as the first to fall, but as the symbol of the price of duty, the man who had given everything for the glory of his people. As for the men who survived, the war left them forever changed. Achilles, Odysseus, and the others would return to their homes, but the ghosts of their comrades, of Protesilaus, would never truly leave them. The war had claimed them all in one way or another, and the cost of victory would be felt long after the battle ended. The Trojan War had ended in the flames of Troy, but the death of Protesilaus lingered like the smoke from the city's burning ruins. His sacrifice, the first life claimed by the war, was not one that would be easily forgotten. Though many warriors had died in the battle, none had embodied the same tragic heroism as Protesilaus. He was the first to step onto the soil of Troy, and he was the first to pay the price. As the Greeks returned to their homes, the myth of Protesilaus spread, carried by the songs of bards and the whispers of warriors. His death was not seen as a failure, but as the ultimate act of bravery, sacrificing everything for his people and his duty. The Greeks, in their victorious return, could not forget the cost of their triumph, and the memory of Protesilaus served as a grim reminder of the price of war. But while his comrades moved on, Protesilaus' story remained a haunting one. In Phyllis, his hometown, a memorial was erected in his honour. The people of Crete, who had once feared for the fate of their king, now revered him as a martyr, a symbol of everything that had been lost in the war. His name was inscribed on the walls of temples and palaces, a tribute to the first among the Greeks to die for the cause. His legacy became a part of the very fabric of their history, a story of honour, of sacrifice, and of the uncontrollable forces of fate. In time, the Trojan War faded from the memory of the living, its warriors becoming legends rather than men. Protesilaus, though, was not forgotten. The first Greek to fall had become more than just a casualty of battle. He had become a symbol of the war's greater cost. His name lived on in the epics that followed, sung by the poets who chronicled the deeds of the great heroes. But even as his legacy was celebrated, the gods continued to play their part. Hera and Zeus, ever watchful over the lives of men, ensured that the memory of Protesilaus would not fade. The gods, for all their intervention, did not take sides in the mortal realm. They simply watched as men made their choices and paid the price. Protesilaus had fulfilled his destiny, and though he had been a hero in life, it was in death that his true power as a symbol was realized. His name became synonymous with sacrifice, not just for glory but for a greater cause. In the years that followed, Achilles, Odysseus, and the other Greek heroes would be honored, but Protesilaus' death remained a solemn reminder that even the mightiest warriors had their limits. His death taught them that there was no glory without sacrifice and no victory without loss. The gods might decide who would live and who would die, but it was the mortals who paid the price. Protesilaus' story became a cornerstone of Greek myth, a tale told not just to celebrate the bravery of heroes, but to remind future generations of the cost of war. His legacy was that of the first sacrifice, the first to fall for the cause, but also the first to embody the ideals that would shape future heroes: duty, courage, and the acceptance of fate. As the years passed, the grand epics of the Trojan War gave way to a quieter, more sombre remembrance of its fallen heroes. The songs of the great battles eventually grew quieter. The cheers of victory faded into the whispers of those who had lived through the horrors. Among the men who had given their lives in the name of glory, Protesilaus stood out not just as the first to die, but as the first to become a legend, His story, one that was immortalised, not just as a tale of war, but as a lesson on sacrifice, fate, and the human condition. In the city of Phyllis, where he had once been a young hopeful warrior, his memory lived on. Every year the people of the city would gather to honour Protesilaus with a solemn festival, a day not just of remembrance, but of reflection. On this day the citizens of Phyllis would speak his name with reverence, telling the story of his bravery, his noble sacrifice, and the tragedy that accompanied it. His sacrifice was woven into the fabric of their identity. Protesilaus, the first to fall, had become a symbol of both the courage and the cost of war.